Welcome to this Hangout focusing on Cisco UCS Director. In this session, you will have the opportunity to see how Cisco UCS Director reduces data center complexity through centralized automation and management of the industry's leading converged infrastructure solutions, all of which are based on Cisco UCS. Whoops. Well, let's not. Sorry, for some reason the screen share doesn't want to come up. But if we kind of describe to you what the positioning looks like, you're probably familiar with Cisco UCS. At the very basic level, there is UCS Manager. That's designed to be able to manage single UCS systems. And then when you want to geographically disperse those UCS systems, there is Central, which allows you to now manage those service profiles across multiple data centers. But most customers today want to go way beyond just managing their compute. They want to be able to manage compute, network, and storage as a unified whole. And so that's exactly where UCS Director comes into play. It allows you to manage in a unified way across your server, your network, and your storage, as well as your virtualization layer, as if it was one single unit. And it does that across physical and virtual, because that's really important in today's data center environments. Now, the other thing that's happening is customers, once they automate their infrastructure, they're saying, I want to go further. And they're now adding cloud. And that's where intelligent automation for cloud comes in. It sits right on top of UCS Director. And it gives you that capability of leveraging the infrastructure for your cloud environments and your platform as a service environments. So as I mentioned at the opening, data centers today have become really complex environments. If you think about it, over 75% of an IT's budget is being spent on operations. That leaves a real meager small percent to manage the everything else. And what IT is told us is they need to get to the everything else. Cisco UCS Director was built from a clean sheet of paper to operationally integrate the data center infrastructure stack, as I mentioned, versus physical and virtual, and to address the time-consuming manual processes that are burdening IT organizations today. So Phani, how does UCS Director reduce the complexity of managing this data center environment, especially when it's using converged infrastructure stacks?
Hi, Joann. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Phani Penmethsa. I am a technical marketing engineer, and I'm part of UCS Director product management team. UCS Director provides centralized management, automation, and orchestration from a single unified view. Let me walk you through how UCS Director simplifies the converged infrastructure management and automation. Let me share my screen first. In the next few minutes, I'll walk you through how UCS Director provides a simplified unified management. So UCS Director provides a web browser-based management interface. So here, I'm going to log in as an administrator. So this is an admin user. When you click on the login button, it launches you the admin portal of Cisco UCS Director. So here on the top menu, you can see the dashboard, converged, virtual, and physical, other top-level view menus through which you can manage your converged infrastructures. First, let's have a look at the first top-level menu, dashboard. In this view, it gives you the capacity information of your converged infrastructure. Here you can see how the UCS servers are consumed and associated with service profiles. Also, it is giving you how your storage is consumed with the capacity, and from virtual infrastructure point of view as well, how the CPU and memory are consumed. This dashboard is completely customizable. For each and every user, they can add their own favorite reports. Next, we can look at the Converge View tab. Here we have two converged infrastructures. One is a FlexPod running with Hyper-V, which has a NetApp clustered ONTAP storage. and then we have vBlock. Under the vBlock, we have EMC VNX based storage, MDS switches, Nexus switches, UCS compute, and VMware virtual infrastructure. Now let's look at the FlexPod converged infrastructure, and we can go inside the NetApp clustered ONTAP controllers. Here, it allows you to manage your NetApp storage, right? So in a converged infrastructure, you have multiple element managers. You have NetApp, device manager, your Nexus management layer, your UCS compute management layer, and your virtual infrastructure layer. So in this view, the Cisco UCS Director is simplifying the management of all of these devices by bringing them together into single pane of glass. In this view, it is giving you the how the NetApp storage is consumed from aggregate. When you look at the aggregates, how much is the total capacity, how much is consumed, how much is being used, and also you can browse through all of these tabs to view how the NetApp storage is configured. You can see how many controllers are configured in this clustered ONTAP controllers, and you can look at the vServers, which are the virtual controllers in the NetApp storage, and you can look at the aggregates, vServer piece, and snap mirrors and other tabs and whatnot. UCS Director not only discovers the configuration, it also allows you to manage and configure the storage. So here we are looking at the aggregates tab, where it is showing you how many aggregates are configured. And also it allows you to create new aggregates from this view. You can see the available capacity, used capacity, and total capacity. Now if you look at the vServers, the virtual controllers, it gives you the the virtual NetApp controller vServer configuration. You can see how many volumes are configured, how many virtual interfaces are configured. If no volumes are configured, you can create new volumes from this interface. You can look at the LUNs tab. You can create the LUNs from this interface. So this briefs about how you can manage NetApp storage controller from UCS Director. Now let's look at the Nexus switch management. This is the switch management view, and you can see different tabs here. From this view, you can go through how the Nexus switch is being configured. You can look at the interfaces tab, license tab, VTP status, VLANs, where you can see all of these configurations from this UCS Director view. If you drop down this menu here, it gives you what are the operations you can perform on this Nexus device. You can create VLAN, you can create vSANs, you can create SAN zones, SAN zone sets, and whatnot. Next, we can look at the configuration tab. So here, UCS Director will capture the both running configuration and startup configuration of Nexus switch. In the running configuration, you can quickly see how the switch being configured. It not only collects the current activity configuration, it also periodically collects this running configuration and keeps them as a backup. So which allows the administrator at point in time can go back in the time and see how the switch was configured. You can see the interfaces tab, how many interfaces are there and their status, which interface is up, which interface is down, and you can see the port capabilities, what type of interfaces you have. You can see the VLANs tab, how many VLANs are configured, and you can do the SAN zoning configuration management as well. You can see the fabric login, which shows you which devices are logged into the fabric. And you can browse through all of these tabs to manage your Nexus switches. Now we can look at the UCS compute. So here the UCS Director has discovered the complete UCSM configuration, and you can see how many chassis you have. You can see how many servers are discovered, how many are associated with service profiles, how many are powered on, powered off, and whatnot. Also, on the top level, you can see different tabs. You can go through the UCS chassis, how they are configured, and you can go through the organizations. You can go through the service profiles and whatnot. So if you drop down, so these are the tabs which are available. These are the management tabs. You can go through each tab and see to look into the UCS configuration. Here we are looking at UCS servers. We can see total how many servers are there, how many powered on, powered off, how many are associated and unassociated. And you can perform all the life cycle management actions. You can see here, you can power on, power off, associate, disassociate. You can do all the UCS management functions here. And we can look at the organizations, the UCS organizations. You can go inside the organization and you can do all the boot policy management, your VHP templates, VNIC templates, your pool management, everything from this view. You can add, edit, delete, and similarly for VHP templates. Similarly for VNIC templates and the Mac pools. With that, let's look at the virtual infrastructure management. If you go to the VMware vCenter infrastructure management here, Cisco UCS Director discovers complete vCenter infrastructure configuration and gives you the capacity information straight away. Here you can see how the capacity being consumed by different virtual infrastructure objects. And you can browse through all of the tabs, like in clusters. How many ESXi clusters are configured? How many ESXi host nodes are there? What's their hypervisor version? And the VMs tab gives you how many VMs are there, and it lets you to manage the virtual machines from this interface. So if you drop down, these are the virtual machine lifecycle management operations you can perform from here. From performance monitoring point of view, UCS Director provides very simplified heat map reports. So it provides a color-coded representation of how the virtual machines are consuming the CPU, memory, and storage resources. From this single view, administrator can quickly find out what are the VMs are really hogging your infrastructure resources, whether it be CPU, memory, or storage. So Cisco UCS Director not only provides a simplified, unified management, it also provides end-to-end automation for your converged infrastructures. So with that, back to you, Joann. Thank you.
Great. So let's dig a little bit deeper. So Mike, tell us, how does UCS Director allow admins to create those end-to-end workflows and still maintain an out-of-the-box approach?
Thanks, Joann. First, let me introduce myself as well. So my name is Mike Zimmerman. I'm also a TME, or Technical Marketing Engineer, with the UCS Director Business Unit. So it's a great question, Joann. So the UCS Director provides an out-of-the-box task library and also a workflow designer that together provide tools necessary for building customized workflow operations for customers. So what we'll do here in the next couple minutes is take a look at a demo leveraging that task library as well as the workflow designer to build in this case, a simple demo of a two-step operation. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. So we'll kind of pick up from where Phani left off here. You can see we've got our flex pod here, as well as our VBlock. Here we're looking at our VBlock system. So what we're actually going to do is, in this example, we're going to create a workflow that adds a VLAN to our UCS Manager system, as well as one of the Nexus 5Ks. And then you can kind of extrapolate from there as far as building an end-to-end workflow. Hopefully you'll get a good idea of actually how this is done through this demo. So if we navigate to Policies and Orchestration, this brings us to our kind of Workflow Central page, our Orchestration page. First off, you can see that there's a folder structure here that just provides some organization around the workflows that already exist within the system. So let's go a step further here and take a look at adding a workflow. First off, we provide a workflow name. So we're going to call this Add Vlan, as well as an optional description here. So as I mentioned before, we're going to add a VLAN to our UCS Manager system, as well as one of the Nexus switches within that VBlock. Next, we choose a workflow context. This really sets the context for in which this workflow will be run. In most cases, you're going to choose any here, and what that means is we're going to define the context within the workflow itself. You could also choose selected VM here, which would mean we would present the user or the user executing this workflow with a list of VMs, and this workflow will be run on that selected VM. Okay. The save as compound task here. What this does is saves this workflow. Once we create the workflow, it saves it as another task in the task library. So this workflow can actually be referenced as another task, maybe in a larger workflow that you might want to build. Then we can also either choose from an existing folder that is already there, or place this workflow in a new folder. So here we're going to create a folder called Development. So if we hit Next here, so this next portion is very important. What we want to do is, with any workflow, there may be a certain set of inputs that we want to get from the user that is executing the workflow. So as an admin, while we're building these workflows, we can decide where we get certain required information from. What this screen does is allow us to basically set up a form for getting that information from the end user. So in this case, we're going to create, in our example, we're going to create two prompts for the end user. The first one we're going to call VLAN ID. Remember, we're in this example, we're adding a VLAN to our stack here. So we provide an input label. So this is how the variable will be referenced throughout the workflow. We'll see VLAN ID show up, and you'll see that here in the demo. You can provide a description as well as make this variable or this input an option. So we can actually provide options to the end user. One of the important pieces here is the input type. The input type, and we'll see this a little bit further as we move along within the tasks, the input type defines where you can use this variable. So there's certain restrictions with the different tasks where the system knows what type of variable it's looking for certain inputs. And I'll explain that a little bit further as we go along. I think it'll make a little more sense. So we're going to select our input type here. We've got a nice search box here in the upper right. So knowing that I'm looking for VLAN ID, I can search for VLAN ID and choose my VLAN ID type here. And we'll see how that maps into tasks here in just a minute. Okay, so we're going to click Submit here to add that input. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing with one more input. We're going to call that VLAN name. And so we're going to use this to set a VLAN description on our different devices so that we can be very descriptive. We're also going to choose an input type here. We're going to make this a generic text input so that we can, again, receive text from the end user to use as a description for this VLAN. Okay. So now we have our two inputs created. So basically, this is our form that we will prompt the end user for when they execute this workflow. They're going to get prompted for a VLAN ID and also a VLAN name. Okay. So now we submit our workflow here. So the workflow has been created from a top level, but we still need to add tasks into this workflow and actually create the process. So if we look in our development folder here and we double click on our actual workflow, we open up the workflow designer here. So this is one of the tools that I mentioned before. If you look on the left-hand side here, this is our workflow library. I'm sorry, our task library. The majority of the engineering work that our team does around UCS Director is building these pre-built workflow tasks, which live in the library here. Examples of those tasks might be add VLAN to UCS Manager, might be create a vServer on NetApp storage, might be create a LUN on VNX storage. So I think we have well over 600 tasks in our task library today. So a very robust task library that can be used, as we'll see here, to build customized workflows. So in our example here, let's look for some VLAN tasks here, and specifically, first let's look for UCS Add Vlan Task. So our first step in this process will be to add the VLAN to UCS Manager. So we simply drag and drop that task over when we find it. The first page here, you're basically presented with a wizard that takes you through the process for mapping inputs and outputs. That's really the gist here of building a workflow, is finding the tasks in the task library that perform the operations that are required. And then it's a matter of mapping inputs and outputs together throughout the workflow. So on this first page of the wizard here, we can provide a comment, just a little bit more description on what we're doing. And you also see under the task details, you see the output variables. So once this task is run, those are the outputs that this task creates and can be used later on in the workflow. And I'll ask you to kind of remember those variables, and I'll show you how those show up in subsequent tasks. So let's click Next here. The user input mapping page within the wizard lists out the inputs that are required or that can be used within this task. So you see things like VLAN name, account name, VLAN ID. You see common and global, as well as fabric A, fabric B. So we can choose to create a global VLAN as well as on specific fabrics as well. So what we do in the user input mapping here is we can take that form or that information that we get from the end user. Remember, we created a VLAN ID and VLAN name input, and we can map those into this specific task. Okay. Just kind of showing you all the input variables here. So let's show how to kind of map those in. So if we select Map to Input, or I'm sorry, to User Input, we get prompted with a drop-down that shows us those two variables that we created in the form when we instantiated this workflow. So we have VLAN name, VLAN ID. In this case, we want to use VLAN name. And then we're also going to create a global VLAN here. So we're going to map to user input as well, and we're going to select our VLAN ID variable. Okay. Now, at this point, the other inputs that are required, we're not going to map to user inputs. We're actually going to statically assign them as an admin. And so that's what we're going to do on the tasks, task inputs page on the next screen here. So anything that I did not map to a user input, I'm actually going to statically assign within the workflow. So for our account name, we're going to choose our UCS Manager that is part of the vBlock system. So it should be the second one here. We're going to keep our VLAN type as common global. We could also choose Fabric A, Fabric B. And then for the sharing, this is a standard VLAN that we're creating, so we're going to keep that as none. If this was something like a private VLAN, we've got some other options there that you can set. Virtual infrastructure here also allows you to get a little bit more granular in creating the VLAN. So what you can actually do is select certain organizations to create this VLAN within. You can add it to specific service profiles, add it into service profile templates, and also VNIC templates as well. For this exercise, we're going to keep it very simple and just create it as a global VLAN. But just wanted to point out that those options were available. Okay. So if we click Submit here, what will happen is this task will be saved with all the inputs and mappings that we've created here. And what we'll do next is we'll just drag one more task over for our Nexus switch, and I'll quickly show you how to map that into the workflow. So if we search for our network VLAN tasks here, we're going to use Create VLAN under Cisco Network Tasks. And it's a very similar operation here. So we provide a comment. Another note here, you see under the task details, you see all the outputs that this task provides that can be used later on in other tasks in the workflow. Our user input mapping page, we're going to do a very similar process. We're going to map our VLAN ID input as well as our VLAN name. And you remember before where I asked you to kind of keep in mind the outputs from the previous task. You notice that our list of options here has grown with this second task, and that's because that first task had those 4 outputs that are now available to use in the user input mappings. So you can either use the information you get from an end user, remember that form that we created, or here you can use information that was created as outputs from a previous task. In this case, we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to use the same VLAN name, option here. If I wanted to, I could actually map that to the same VLAN ID output there from the previous task there, shown by some of these longer variables here. Again, we're going to click Next here on our task inputs. Again, we're selecting, this is where we're statically assigning anything that was not a user input. In this case, we're going to choose one of our Nexus 5548s as the device that the VLAN will be created on for this. We're also going to choose to copy the running configuration, so we're saving that running config to our startup config. Okay. At this point, it's a matter of connecting the dots between the 2 tasks. So we're going to drag our success complete to the next task here, connecting the dots. And then on failure, we're going to take it over to completed failed there. So we're kind of creating our process there, if you will, with the 2 tasks. At that point, we can click on the Validate Workflow button. What this does is check all the required inputs within the tasks, making sure that they're mapped appropriately, making sure there's no issues throughout the workflow. Just a quick point here. This is a very simple demonstration with 2 tasks, but it's very easy with this drag and drop feature within the workflow designer and the robust task library that we have to create a very involved process, a very long operation that would typically take quite a few man hours usually to pass that information between different teams and get these operations performed on different devices. So this is kind of a quick example of how to build a workflow with our workflow tool here. Okay.
Great, Mike. So now that we have this custom workflow, how can this capability, is it only admins that can execute these, or can other people execute these workflows as well?
Good question, Joann. So let me show you a couple different examples here. So we've got our workflow created that we just worked on. Let me show you real quick how to execute that as an admin first, and then we'll switch over from an end user perspective and show you what that looks like. So a very simple procedure from an admin perspective. I highlight the workflow and click Execute Now. You can see here the form that we created with that workflow. So we require a VLAN ID, so we're going to give it 3001, as well as a VLAN name, so a VLAN description here. I'm just going to call it VLAN underscore 3001 for this example. So let's go ahead and kick that off from the admin perspective. While that's running in the background, and we'll kind of take a look at what that looks like in just a few moments, let me show you from an admin perspective how we publish this workflow or this capability to an end user. So if we go to Policies and Catalogs here, we can actually create catalog items that are published operations to end user groups. So you can see our list of catalogs that we already have published. These are published to all the groups, but you can certainly pick and choose specific groups to publish catalog items to. Let's go ahead and add a catalog item. So we're going to provide a catalog name. We'll just keep it simple and call it Add Vlan. We'll provide our description here. It's an optional component. For our catalog type, the most common here are probably standard and advanced. Standard is a simple, a standard VM provisioning catalog item. What we're going to take a look at is the advanced catalog item, which is publishing those workflows or any workflow to an end user. So we're going to take the advanced catalog type. We can choose an icon that will show up to the end user. I typically like to show the workflow icon here if I'm publishing an actual workflow to the end users. We're going to choose to apply this to all groups. Again, we optionally could pick and choose specific groups to publish this to. In this case, we're going to choose all groups. And then on the page here, we're going to select which workflow we actually want to publish. And again, this is essentially extending the capability down to the end user, and we'll see how that looks from the end user perspective going forward here. Okay, so we click Next. Get a brief summary here.
So, good. Still get it.
So now let's log out from the admin view and let's take a look from the end user view. So now that we've published that capability to the end user, we're going to log in as the user Mitch Zim here. And first thing you'll notice is the interface itself looks a little bit different here. We've streamlined it for the end user. And you can see the different capabilities under the catalog tab here. You can see the different capabilities this user can see, or basically the admin has published these capabilities to the end user. If the end user double clicks on any one of these capabilities, let's choose the Add Vlan workflow that we're just taking a look at. If I click Next here, again, the end user is prompted with the same type of form to fill out here. So this end user, let's say, is going to create 3002 as the VLAN, and then description will be VLAN 3002 as well. So we click Next, and you get a summary here. And that's as simple as it gets there. So the end user basically double-clicked, provide a little bit of information there, and is able to kick off a workflow now.
So, Mike, how how can I now monitor this workflow or this service request?
Yeah. So there's a couple different perspectives, Joann. First off, let's take a look from the end user perspective. Now that we've kicked off this workflow and what is actually called a service request, once it's instantiated or executed, we call it a service request. From the end user perspective, the end user can go to the Services tab. At the top left here. From the Services tab, this user can view the different workflows or the different service requests for this particular group here. So let's take a look real quick at the service request that we just kicked off for adding a VLAN. If we double click, you can see that this workflow is still running. You can see the high-level steps or the tasks that are involved in this process. And you can see the current task that the system is working on in order to complete the workflow. So just give it another second here. Everything should turn green here, and then we should have a completed workflow. In just a moment, we'll switch over to the admin view and take a look at the admin's kind of approach to monitoring service requests. The admin is provided with quite a bit more detail there. Okay, so we saw from that perspective the service request had completed, and that's the view from the end user perspective. Let's go log back in as the admin. And very quickly, we'll go to organizations and service requests here. And the top two service requests that we'll have here, you'll see our service request that was initiated by the admin, as well as the service request that was initiated by our end user. So we can take a look at it either one of these. Let's just double click and take a little bit deeper look from the admin perspective at this specific workflow. First off, you can see they're provided with that same high-level view, but if you notice in the top left corner, there's actually more information that's provided to the admin. They get, first off, a detailed log of all the inputs, outputs, what functions, what operations are happening on which devices, etc. So all the information that's happening within each of the tasks that are part of that workflow. Okay. The next tab, Objects Created and Modified, gives you a summary of the different objects that were created, whether it's VLANs, VLAN descriptions, and then on what devices there. So it's more of a summarized page. The Input-Output tab here, very important tab, and especially in troubleshooting, gives you all of the inputs values, all of the output values for each task within the workflow. So if you have several tasks in the workflow, this is a very valuable tool to look at how information was passed from one task to another. So the admin's provided with quite a bit more information on that service request versus the end user there. And basically with those tools, you see either from the end user perspective or the admin perspective, both have a different view into monitoring a specific service request. Back to you, Joann.
Great. So thanks, Mike. We all know that UCS Director uses a different orchestration model than what's available in the marketplace today from other solutions. So Shankar, let's bring you into the conversation, and can you explain why model-based orchestration is significant?
Thanks, Joann. Let me introduce myself. I'm a product manager in UCS Director, Cisco UCS Director team. If you look at the normal script-based models, script-based models are mostly the programs written for a specific runtime environment to execute specific kinds of operations. But they lack the understanding of the physical and logical relationship that happens between these components, and it gives a less flexibility for the admins to go and customize and extend those operations. But if you look at the UCS Director model-based orchestration, what it's going to do is it's going to go and discover the infrastructure, get and create the relationship, physical and as well as logical relationships across each of those components. And not only that, it is stored inside the database of the UCS Director, where as Michael was mentioning about the workflows and the tasks, those are nothing but they are validated against that specific model to make sure each task can be executed on each of those components. So it is also used to deliver the status, utilization, and consumption to the end user, the admins as well as end users.
So I can see where a single portal would be really beneficial to centrally manage infrastructure, and therefore that reduces complexity. But what if IT is organized by role, such as I'm the server guy, or I'm the networking person, or the storage person?
Yes, that's a good question. So today, UCS Director supports both the centralized as well as the segmented operation models. So so UCS Direct has the capabilities to define the user roles and the functions within that particular user role. So let me share my screen to show a small demo of how this happens. So what I'm going to show here is how admin can view into different by default user profiles and the functions which are part of each user profile. So if you go into administration system and user permissions, you can see that there are a couple of user roles already predefined in UCS Director. And if you look at, this is one of the all policy admin, which covers the entire, it's more like a super admin kind of thing, which has a privileges for all read and write for each of those particular functions what you see here. Now let's go into the billing admin. So if you look at the billing admin is more focused towards your chargeback and mostly your billing kind of operations. So if you look at here, he will have only the operations, budgeting, or resource accounting, or chargeback. So again, this can be updated based on what you want for each of those roles. Now let's look at there are three different kinds of user roles defined inside UCS Director: computing admin, network admin, and storage admin. In compute admin, he has both privileges for physical computing, read and write, but he will not have access for write access to the physical storage or network. If you look at network admin, he will have read and write access for the physical network, but he will have only read access to the storage and computing. And now if you look at the storage admin, he will have read and write access to the storage, but he will not have read and write access to the computing and network. So what I'm going to show here is going to create a new user with the role computing admin. So I'm going to click login users, select the user type as computing admin, give a name, comp admin. So what this computing admin will have only privilege to perform any read and write operations on computing, but not on storage or network. So added it. Now I'm going to log out and log in as that specific compute admin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log into a compute platform here, double click that, and go into maybe the service profiles and see if I can add service profiles or not. As enabled, and I can go and add the service profile into the compute admin. That means I have the privilege for this compute admin. Okay. Similarly, I can go into the fabric interconnects. I can do any kind of operations into that. Like I double click that and I can say configure expand module, expansion module ports and other things. So I can perform all the read and write operations here. let's go back to a storage component and see if I have access as a compute admin. So one thing in that I have read access, but I don't have any write access, so I cannot create any data modes, or I cannot create any LUNs or volumes. So if I go into the LUNs, I'll be able to read it, but I will not be able to create a LUN or volume.
So those of us that live in large organizations, we understand that there's tension between our users and IT. And that tension comes from the fact that there's intercorporate billing. And the user sees that bill from IT and they go, what? So how does UCS Director help with that situation, begin to resolve that tension?
So UCS Director provides the dashboards, what Phani was explaining before. We also provide the resource limits. We also provide the cost models, as well as we also provide some sort of cloud sense reports. So let me share my screen here. So what I'm going to show you here is different kind of reports or different kind of monitoring things which UCS Director provides. So if you look at this is the dashboard watch Phani was showing to understand what is the capacity utilization. It gets the information about each of those elements and then maps it into this particular dashboard. So again, these dashboards can be customizable. So if you look at this one, it's showing up you the active VMs or inactive VMs as well as other information. Now let's go and look at the reports. I'm going to talk here about how a user can, admin can generate reports, find out the information about how his infrastructure is performing. So if you look at here, this report shows you the VM count with the CPU utilization, memory utilization, and other things. So you have a different kind of report called virtual infrastructure assets report. It gives you the end-to-end asset information about your virtual infrastructure. So here it says how many active servers or inactive servers, as well as cluster servers, as well as talks about which hardware vendor it is running on, and other information like ESX versions and all those things. Now let's go to the resource limits what we were talking before. So first and foremost thing is you can set the resource limit for the groups. So you can say, so here I selected the user group called Acme. I'm going to say enable the resource limit. So initially it will be disabled, but you can enable the resource limits. You can define how much the resource limit you want to assign for this particular user group. So this particular screen talks about that. So once it is enabled, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look into the summary and see how it is. Like I started the resource limits and I want to see how it is performing, and I'm looking at the status of it. So if you look at the status of most of the resource limits are good, and they're showing up on the right hand side on the status bar. But if you look at one of them, I just for the demo purpose I set up it as 1 CPU 1 gigahertz limit, and it says limit reach. So that is one of the things which we can definitely monitor. Now let's look at the budget entry. You want to add a budget to this particular user group. So one thing admin can do is he can define a budget amount per month and then allocate that budget amount to this particular user group. So how it can be done is basically go into the administration, select the user group and say budget policy, enable the budget watch, and so it will start looking at how if it's above or below the budget. And also you can, if you can say that he can go over the budget by selecting both the options. So you can select enable budget watch as well as say allow over budget.
Okay, so as we round the end here, we understand that UCS Director does not live in an island all by itself. It does need to go out and integrate with other solutions. So Shri, let's describe how UCS Director can be extended and integrate into other capabilities in the IT environment.
Thanks, Joann. I am Hary Vengadasubbu. I'm a product line manager within the UCS Director team as well. As you heard quite a bit from Phani, Mike, as well as from Shankar, UCS Director is a powerful software platform. It has got a lot of capabilities, features, and functionality that are very important in a lot of ways for data center operations as well as for cloud operations. So how does this environment, this platform, fit into your existing operation? That's where the flexibility of the software platform with respect to how you integrate to your existing billing systems or operational systems, or ability to customize workflows end-to-end so that your specific needs of your organizations can be met, can be done very easily with customization, as well as the ability to add new custom connectors to new set of devices that may be coming, or perhaps devices that have been in place for a long time. Those are things that could be customized.
We had some technical difficulties, so let's just end this by finishing up, and from the perspective of where can you get more information if you want to about UCS Director. And you can do that by going to cisco.com/go/UCS Director. The other thing that we have available to you, if you'd really like to go even deeper than where we've gone today, there are live technical demos with TMEs, totally live, not recorded. You can ask whatever question you want. And you can go and schedule a session, and it's at buildprice/UCS Director. There are a series of times and dates that are available, and these live sessions happen about every other week. So lastly, we thank you very much for your attention and for hanging out with us today, and we hope you've learned a lot, and please go learn more about UCS Director. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.